My husband took out a $4 million policy on me. The underwriter was my college roommate. The notary asked if I needed a pen. I had 3. I'd been carrying them for 11 weeks. One in my jacket pocket, one in my bag, one in my car's center console, because I am a forensic accountant and I have trust issues with ballpoint pens the same way other people have trust issues with, say, husbands who take out multi-million-dollar life insurance policies without mentioning it at dinner. These things happen. You prepare. The notary was a small, earnest woman named Cheryl, who worked for Victor Reese's firm, and had the professionally neutral expression of someone who has witnessed the dissolution of approximately 800 marriages and developed the emotional range of a well-calibrated photocopier. She slid the final page across the mahogany table. Victor's table. The kind that costs more than my first car, and is designed specifically to make you feel the gravity of whatever you're signing on it. And she smiled the smile of someone doing their job with dignity, which I respected enormously. I used my own pen. It was a Tuesday in November, 11 degrees outside, and the loop was doing that thing it does in late autumn, where the wind comes off the lake at angles that seem to violate the basic laws of geometry. Somewhere in the building, an elevator chimed. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago was being aggressively itself. Victor Reese, who was sitting across from me with the expression of a man who has seen worse and is professionally prohibited from saying so, watched me sign each page with the same methodical care I bring to everything. He did not rush me. Victor has never rushed anyone in his life. Victor bills at a rate that makes rushing financially inadvisable. "That's the last one," Cheryl said. I set the pen down. 11 weeks. That's how long it took from the moment my phone rang on a Wednesday afternoon in late August to the moment I sat in that chair and signed my name to the legal document that formally ended my marriage to Derek Allen Cole, transferred to me a house I was planning to sell, a brokerage account he hadn't yet managed to drain, and a settlement that Victor had negotiated with the particular precision of a man who takes things like spousal deception and financial endangerment extremely personally on behalf of his clients. "Mrs. Cole," Victor said, which was the last time anyone would call me that. "Ms. Hartwell," I said. He almost smiled. "Ms. Hartwell, are you all right?" I thought about the question the way I think about all questions, which is to say I examined it from several angles before answering. "I will be," I said. That was true. But to understand why it was only will be and not am, you need to go back 11 weeks. To a Wednesday afternoon, to a phone call I almost didn't answer because the number wasn't in my contacts, and I have a policy about unknown numbers that I now understand was saving my life by keeping my calendar clear for the moment it actually mattered. My name is Claire Hartwell. I am 38 years old. I grew up in Rockford, Illinois, which is the kind of city that builds a specific kind of person, the kind who understands that nothing is given, everything has to be earned, and the earning is never as straightforward as anyone makes it sound. My mother was an ER nurse who worked double shifts and still knew where every dollar went. My father left when I was 9. He did not leave a forwarding address, a reason, or any lasting financial support. But he did leave me a constitutional inability to trust numbers I haven't personally verified, which turned out to be the most valuable inheritance anyone has ever accidentally provided. I went to Northwestern on academic scholarship. I studied accounting because I wanted to understand the systems that determined whether families like mine had enough, and because I had a gift for finding the place where numbers lied. Numbers always lie, if you know how to listen. The lie isn't usually in the big figures. It's in the little ones, the rounding, the category someone chose to file a thing under, the expense that appears once in one quarter and never again, the absence of something that should be there. I became a forensic accountant because I was very good at this, and because it pays exceptionally well when you're good at it, which I am. I married Derek Cole 6 years ago, at 32, in a ceremony at the Newberry Library that cost $40,000, which I remember precisely because I negotiated $7,000 off the catering and put the difference into my personal emergency fund, which Derek thought was excessive, and I thought was simply Tuesday. We disagreed about money the way we disagreed about most things. He thought I was too careful. I thought he wasn't careful enough, and we both agreed, implicitly, to treat this as charming rather than diagnostic. That was my mistake. Not my only one. But we'll get to those. Derek Cole, at 41, was the kind of handsome that photographs well at charity galas. Commercial real estate, mid-sized firm, the kind of deal-making that requires a very specific talent for making people feel seen and important right up until the moment they've signed. He had a laugh that filled rooms, not in the obnoxious way, in the way that makes you feel like the room is the right size only when he's laughing. He was good with waitstaff. He remembered birthdays. He had the specific smile of a man who has never been told no by anyone who matters, which looks exactly like confidence until the moment it doesn't. He also, at some point in the 36 months before that Wednesday phone call, tried to kill me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's what happens when you've spent 11 weeks organizing events into chronological order for depositions. You start thinking in timelines. Bear with me. The timeline matters. The call came at 2:47 p.m. on a Wednesday in late August. I was at my desk, which is in the second bedroom of our house in Wilmette. Was our house, Derek's and mine, a 4-bedroom colonial that cost $1.1 million in 2019, and which Derek had leveraged in ways I was not yet aware of. I was reviewing a client's expense reports, which is the kind of work that looks boring and is boring, but boring in the way that surgery is boring if everything goes right, and my job is to find the places where everything does not go right. The number that called me was a 312 area code, which is downtown Chicago, which could have been anything. A solicitor, a new client referral, my dentist, who I'd been avoiding since March. I answered because I was at a natural stopping point in the expense report, and because, as I said, that decision was apparently cosmically load-bearing. Claire Hartwell? The voice was careful, professional, but underneath the professionalism there was something else, a specific kind of tension that I have learned to recognize over many years of talking to people who know something they are not certain they should know. Speaking, I said. It's Janine Kwan. We roomed together. Northwestern, junior year, Patterson Hall. Janine. I sat back in my chair. Of course, how are you? A pause. I'm well. Claire. I'm calling about something that is professionally unusual for me, and I want to be upfront about that. I'm an underwriter. Senior underwriter. I work for Meridian Life Group. Okay, I said. Another pause. Janine was always precise with her pauses. She was the kind of person who organized her textbooks by subject, and then by date of publication within subject, and then put little tabs on the chapters she hadn't read yet so she'd know at a glance exactly how behind she was. I had liked her enormously. We received an application, she said. A life insurance application, for a policy on you. I did not say anything immediately, because I am very good at not saying things immediately. Filed by your husband, she continued. Derek Cole, named as sole beneficiary. I see, I said. Claire. Her voice dropped slightly, and in the drop I heard something that had nothing to do with actuarial tables. The policy amount is $4 million. There are moments in a life that function like a camera shutter. Everything before them is the setup. Everything after them is different. This was one of those. $4 million. My husband, who knew I drove a 2021 Acura MDX, who knew I took the same route to the train station twice a week, who had been unusually attentive and unusually thoughtful for the past 2 months in a way I had filed, in the part of my brain I use for anomalies, under pattern shift, investigate later. My husband had applied for a $4 million life insurance policy on my life without telling me. 2 months after I totaled my car on the Edens Expressway, in what every police report called a random accident. The application came to my desk, Janine said. I almost didn't catch it. It went through standard intake, but I was doing the risk review and I saw the name and... She stopped. It's unusual, Claire. The application was filed without your co-signature. In Illinois, that can be legal under certain policy structures. But there are disclosure requirements, and several elements of this application triggered our internal flags. And then I saw your name and I... Another pause, shorter this time. I couldn't just process it. I was very quiet for a moment. Janine, I said finally, does anyone at your company know you're calling me? No. Is this call going to create problems for you? Potentially, she said. I'm operating in a gray area, but I reviewed the relevant regulations and I believe I'm on the right side of the reporting threshold for spousal notification. Barely. That, I said, sounds exactly like you. For the first time, she exhaled. Do you have somewhere safe to be? I'm at home, I said. A beat. Is he there? I looked around my office, the quiet house. Derek was at work, or said he was at work, which were things I was already understanding were not the same sentence. No, I said. Okay. Her voice firmed into something that sounded like a decision she'd made before she dialed. Don't confront him. Don't let him know you know. I need you to understand that what I'm going to tell you next changes the scope of this significantly. I picked up a pen. One of the 3. Tell me, I said. Here's what Janine told me next, which I am going to relay to you with the same calm I have been practicing since the moment I heard it, because the calm is the only way I get through this without destroying a piece of furniture. The $4 million policy was not the first application Derek had filed. 14 months prior. 14 months, which means he was planning this before the car accident, before the excessive attentiveness, before the period I now understood as preparation. Derek had inquired about a separate policy through a different carrier. A smaller policy. $1 million. That application had been denied. This would be unremarkable, except for one detail. On the denied application, the listed beneficiary was not Derek Cole. It was a woman named Ashley Merritt, who was, at the time of the application, Derek's executive assistant. I have been a forensic accountant for 13 years. In that time, I have discovered embezzlement, tax fraud, money laundering, and one extremely creative scheme involving a construction company, a shell entity in Delaware, and 47 separate invoices for a product called architectural consultation that did not exist. I have sat across from people who had hidden things and watched them understand that I had found those things, and I have felt, in those moments, something that is not quite satisfaction but is adjacent to it, the specific feeling of a number resolving into place. This was not that feeling. This was different. This was the feeling of looking at a set of numbers and realizing the equation you thought you were solving was the wrong equation entirely. And the actual equation was something you were standing in the middle of, and the variable for your survival had been, up until this phone call, labeled unknown. He applied for a policy with his assistant as beneficiary, I said, to make sure I had heard it correctly. And was denied, Janine said. I pulled the denial record. The carrier flagged it as part of a routine audit sweep 18 months ago. They kept it on file. When our application came in, my due diligence search pulled the denial. What grounds for denial? Insufficient insurable interest. The policy structure he proposed was unusual. They didn't have grounds for fraud, just grounds for refusal. I was doing math. I want to be clear about what kind of math I was doing, because there are several kinds, and only some of them involve numbers. This math involved variables like the car accident, the second policy, the assistant's name, the timeline, the specific way Derek had, over the past several months, periodically asked me whether I'd updated my estate documents in the tone of someone making casual conversation, rather than the tone of someone who was thinking about my estate documents. The math was telling me something I did not want it to tell me. Janine, I said, I'm going to need you to hold the Meridian application in review as long as you legally can. I estimated approximately 21 business days before I need to make a formal determination, she said. After that, I can extend by another 7 if I cite the disclosure irregularities. Maximum. 28 business days, I said. Yes, that's enough. I said goodbye to Janine Kwan. I set down the phone. I sat in my office for 4 minutes and 40 seconds. I know because the clock on my desk is accurate to the second, and I was watching it because it gave me something to look at that wasn't the inside of my own head. Then I called Victor Reese. Victor Reese, for those of you unfamiliar with the particular subspecies of lawyer he represents, is the kind of attorney who makes other attorneys quietly nervous. He spent 12 years as an assistant U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Illinois, during which time he prosecuted financial crimes with the methodical satisfaction of a man who believes that the law, if correctly applied, is an instrument of genuine justice rather than merely a system of procedures. At 55, he had the bearing of someone who has spent a long time in rooms where things matter, and had accordingly stopped pretending that things that don't matter, matter. He was also, inconveniently for Derek, the person my firm's senior partner recommended when I called her. Because my firm's senior partner is the kind of woman who keeps a mental Rolodex of exactly the right person for every possible catastrophe. And she did not hesitate for a single second when I described my situation in terms that were deliberately clinical and entirely clear. Victor's assistant put me through on the first call. Ms. Hartwell, he said, describe the situation. I described the situation. There was a pause on his end. Not uncertainty. Victor Reese is not uncertain. Calculation. When can you come in? Tomorrow morning, I said. 8 o'clock, he said. Bring everything you have. Documents, statements, anything you've observed. Bring it organized. It will be organized, I said. I heard something in his voice that might, in a less controlled person, have been a smile. I assumed. I spent that night, while Derek ate dinner across the table from me and talked about a development deal in the South Loop, and asked how my day was, and I said, fine, routine. I spent that night building a file, not in the obvious places Derek might find it. I used my work laptop, which has its own encrypted cloud backup, because when you are a forensic accountant and your husband has apparently been plotting something that requires actuarial analysis, you do not save your notes to the shared family Google Drive. The file had sections. It is embarrassing how much I am built for exactly this situation, because the section headers came naturally. Insurance application details, timeline, financial anomalies, physical evidence, preliminary, legal strategy, to be confirmed. I had 6 pages of notes by midnight. Derek was asleep by 10. He slept the sleep of someone who believes they haven't been found out yet, which has a specific quality I can now recognize retroactively. Deep, comfortable, untroubled. I did not sleep. Victor's office is in a building on Wacker that has views of the river, and his actual office has bookshelves that are organized by case type, and then alphabetically by defendant's surname, which I noticed immediately and which made me trust him slightly more, because the organization of a person's books tells you something about the organization of their mind. I put the file on his desk. He read it. He read all of it. He set it down. He looked at me over his glasses with the expression of a man recategorizing something he's just seen. "Mrs. Cole," he said. "Ms. Hartwell," I said. "I've used my maiden name professionally throughout the marriage. I'd prefer to use it now." He noted this. Literally, he wrote something down. "Ms. Hartwell," he said, "I'm going to ask you to stop using the word murder and start using the phrase pattern of conduct." I blinked. "Is that legally important?" "It's strategically important," he said. "Murder requires proof of completion. Pattern of conduct requires evidence of intent and action, which you have substantially more of. We build the pattern. We let the pattern speak." "That seems like a distinction that helps him," I said. "It's a distinction that helps you," he said patiently. "Because if we go to police with 'my husband tried to murder me,' we are in the territory of criminal proceedings, which have a different timeline, a different burden of proof, and a substantially lower probability of you ending up with your assets intact. If we build a civil case grounded in a documented pattern of conduct, insurance fraud, financial deception, intentional harm, we control the timeline, and we make choices about when and how law enforcement gets involved." I thought about this. "You're saying we have more leverage outside the courtroom than in it?" "At this stage," he said. "Yes." I was quiet for a moment. "What does this stage require?" "Evidence," he said. "More of it. Specifically, I'd like documentation of the first 3 incidents you described: the car accident, the medical appointment irregularity, and—" He glanced at his notes. "You mentioned something about your garage." "I mentioned that I needed to check something in the garage," I said. "I haven't checked yet." He looked at me steadily. "I'd like you to check, without touching anything, and I'd like you to take photographs. I am going to be honest with you about the garage. The garage is the part of this story I revisit the least. Not because it doesn't matter, but because of what it means about time. About how long this had been happening before I had the information to understand it. I checked the garage on a Saturday morning while Derek was at his firm's quarterly breakfast, which happened to be real. I have no doubt he attended it. Derek is very good at having an alibi that isn't technically an alibi, just a normal life proceeding normally around the moments it doesn't. What I found, specifically, was this: a small mark on the brake fluid reservoir of my previous car's garage shelf. The car I'd totaled on the Edens. I'd kept a few things from the car after the salvage. The reservoir cap had a mark on it that I had noticed once and dismissed. Looking at it now, with different context, I photographed it and sent the photographs to Victor. Victor sent them to an independent mechanic consultant his firm uses. The consultant's assessment, which I received in writing 3 days later, described the mark as consistent with the type of tool used to loosen, but not fully remove, a brake fluid cap, which would cause a slow leak rather than an immediate failure. Over time. Over, say, a month of regular driving. Until one morning on an expressway, in moderate rain, at moderate speed, the brake response would be subtly but meaningfully degraded. I had walked away from that accident with a bruised collarbone and a totaled car, and 6 weeks of mild trauma, and the sincere, internally held belief that I had been extraordinarily unlucky. I had been extraordinarily lucky. This is the part of the story where I expect people to ask whether I cried, or felt afraid, or felt the kind of primal vertigo that should accompany discovering that the person who sleeps next to you has been attempting to subtract you from the world. The honest answer is, I felt cold. Not cold as in emotional distance. Cold as in the specific temperature of someone whose body has correctly identified that it survived because of blind luck, and is now recalibrating everything to make sure luck is no longer the operative variable. I did not cry. I sat in my car in the driveway for about 8 minutes. Then I went inside and updated my file. Victor called me the next morning. Statistically, he said, and then paused because he knew he was quoting someone. Your underwriter friend, did she use the phrase, statistically, your survival is an outlier? Word for word, I said. She's right, he said. I want to talk to you about the broader pattern. And this is where it expanded again, which is the specific horror of this kind of discovery. It doesn't stay the size you first think it is. It keeps growing until it is the correct size, which is always larger. Victor had, with my signed authorization, requested a broad financial discovery review. His firm's financial investigator had found the following. Derek had, in the 16 months preceding my current situation, done 3 things that were individually explainable and collectively damning. He had rerouted the footage from our home security system's exterior cameras so that a specific 40-minute window every Tuesday and Thursday, the window that covered my return from the train station on the nights I worked downtown, showed a recorded loop rather than live footage. He had, 7 months ago, scheduled a medical appointment for me with a specialist he'd heard about, using my email account while I was traveling for work, and then rerouted the confirmation email to a folder I never checked. I hadn't attended the appointment. I hadn't known about it. The specialist was a cardiologist. The appointment notes, which the office provided when my attorney's office requested them, included a referral request that Derek had apparently drafted and signed, requesting a stress test that included a specific medication protocol that, in patients with an otherwise undiagnosed heart condition, could produce results that were, at minimum, concerning. I did not have an undiagnosed heart condition, but Derek didn't know that. He thought he was setting up a scenario, planting a flagpole in the ground. She had a heart thing. We were so worried. The appointment I never attended was supposed to be the first domino. Except I had been delayed in Cincinnati on a case that ran long, and I'd landed too late to make the appointment, and I had completely forgotten about it because I hadn't known about it in the first place, and so the flagpole went unplanted, and Derek had apparently moved to the next plan, which involved the brake fluid and the Edens Expressway. I survived by forgetting a medical appointment I didn't know I had. If you need a moment, take it. I certainly did. The camera footage was, if anything, the detail that made me the coldest, because the rerouting was technical. It required planning. It required either that Derek had taught himself to do it, which was possible, or that someone had helped him, which I flagged in my notes as confirm. Accomplish alone or assisted? Because the answer to that question had implications for a potential accomplice, which Victor was also interested in. The assistant's name, Ashley Merritt, was now very much on the table. Let me tell you about Ashley Merritt, because she is relevant to this story in a way that is both simpler and more complicated than I initially expected. Ashley Merritt was 29. She had worked for Derek's firm for 2 years. She was good at her job. This I verified. Because when I do anything, I do it completely. She had a performance file that showed consistent ratings. She had, it turned out, no direct knowledge of any life insurance application in her name. Victor's investigator was thorough on this point because it mattered enormously, both legally and morally. And I want to be clear. Ashley Merritt was not Derek's accomplice. She was something worse. She was his backup. The denied application, the $1 million policy with Ashley as beneficiary, was, as best as we could reconstruct, Derek's contingency. If something happened to me, and the primary plan for some reason didn't pay out, whether because of investigation or policy terms or some detail Derek had gotten wrong, Ashley was the fallback financial structure. She didn't know she was a financial structure. She thought she was, presumably, a person in a complicated situation with her married employer, which is its own problem, but it is not the problem we were solving for. Derek had, in essence, built a redundant system. One beneficiary in case the primary plan succeeded. One beneficiary in case the primary plan failed but still required a payout. The fact that he'd put an innocent woman into the equation without her knowledge or consent was the kind of detail that, when I told Victor about it, made Victor set down his coffee cup with the particular care of a man choosing not to use the gesture he'd prefer. He thought of everything, Victor said. He thought of most things, I said. He didn't think of Janine. Victor looked at me. Your college roommate who happened to be his underwriter. Janine Kwan reads the fine print of her own birthday cards, I said. She was never going to process that application without looking at every attached document. He should have used a different carrier, Victor said. He did use a different carrier, I said. The first time. That one got denied on different grounds. The second time, he used Meridian, which is a perfectly reasonable choice for a man who doesn't know that one of their senior underwriters went to Northwestern with his wife. I paused. Statistically, it was unlikely. Statistically, Victor said dryly. Apparently, a lot of things about this situation are outliers. Yes, I said. That's what I'm counting on. Victor looked at me for a moment. You have a plan. I have the beginning of a plan, I said. I need your opinion on whether it's legal. Tell me, I told him. His expression over the course of the telling went through several phases that I would characterize as professional skepticism, analytical engagement, reluctant admiration, and finally something that was almost but not quite a smile. It's legal, he said. Aggressive, but legal. I'm not interested in illegal, I said. Illegal has too many variables. You'd be surprised how many clients say that, Victor said, and don't mean it. I mean it, I said. I audit for a living. I understand what evidence is and what it isn't. I'm not going to manufacture anything. He looked at me for another moment. You're not going to the police. Not yet, I said. Not until we're done. And when we're done? Then it's their problem, I said. I'll have given them everything they need to make it their problem correctly. Victor nodded slowly. Mrs. Cole, Hartwell, Ms. Hartwell. He looked down at his notes, then back up at me. I want to be honest with you. In my experience, the approach you're describing is unusual. Most people in your position want one thing: escape. Get out. Get safe. You're proposing something substantially more deliberate. I'm not proposing it out of anger, I said. And this was true. Whatever anger I had moved it to a shelf. I had looked at it, acknowledged it, and put it somewhere it couldn't interfere with my thinking. I'm proposing it because I'm a forensic accountant and I looked at his financial structure, and I know exactly how to make it fall down. The police can handle the criminal aspects. I'm interested in making sure there's nothing left when they get there. Victor was quiet for a moment. I've been doing this for 23 years, he said. I know. Your conviction rate was exceptional. He looked at me. You checked. I check everything, I said. It's my job. Right, he said. He picked up his pen. Then let's make sure we do this correctly. Derek's financial structure. which I spent 2 weeks mapping in the kind of detail that would later become extremely useful to several different parties, was elegant in the specific way that over-leveraged systems are elegant. Beautiful from a distance, catastrophic up close. He had, over the 6 years of our marriage, built a commercial real estate portfolio that looked impressive, and was, in fact, impressive. If you measured impressiveness in terms of gross value and ignored the debt load, which was the kind of thing people in Derek's world often did, because the numbers on the asset side were so satisfying. He had 4 significant ongoing deals, partnerships, developments, 1 acquisition that had been in escrow for 7 months. Each of them required his personal guarantee, which meant his personal creditworthiness and professional standing were load-bearing structures in all of them simultaneously. The largest was a $30 million development project on the near north side. Mixed-use, residential retail hybrid, the kind of thing that attracts developers who want their name on something, and investors who want a tax-efficient vehicle for their money. Derek's firm was the managing partner. Derek had put his personal guarantee on the lead financing structure. The developer behind the project was a man named Bernard Kulik, who had built 3 similar projects in the past decade and had the specific combination of money and reputation that makes people take your calls. He was 62, meticulous, and he had a general counsel who was methodical in the way that general counsels of successful developers tend to be, which is to say thoroughly. I researched Bernard Kulik the same way I research everything, completely. He had, I found, a policy. Not a written one, a professional one, the kind that emerges from the pattern of decisions a person makes over time. He did not work with people under investigation. Not suspected, not rumored. Under investigation. He had exited 2 prior partnerships at the first credible sign of legal entanglement, and in both cases he had been vindicated by later events that showed the entanglement was real. He was, in other words, exactly the kind of counterparty whose reaction to a specific piece of information would be swift, decisive, and financially devastating to the person the information concerned. I scheduled a meeting. Not with Bernard Kulik directly. With his general counsel, a woman named Patricia Fenn, whose email was publicly available because she was listed as the registered agent for several of the development entities. I sent a brief, professional email from my forensic accounting firm's address, which is, it should be noted, not a small or obscure firm, and my name is searchable, and people who search it find a 21-year professional history that includes several high-profile cases that were covered in trade publications. I said that I had information relevant to a business matter that might affect her client, and I would appreciate 30 minutes of her time at her earliest convenience. She called me within 2 hours. "Ms. Hartwell," she said, "what kind of information?" "The kind that's better shown than summarized," I said. "But I'll tell you this much. It concerns one of your client's partners in the Northside project, and it concerns a regulatory matter that is currently under development but will become public in a form that affects all parties in that financing structure." A pause. "That's deliberately vague." "It's deliberately accurate," I said. "I'm not going to overstate what I have. I don't need to." Another pause, shorter. "Tuesday at 3? "Tuesday at 3, I said. Here's what I brought to that meeting, in the order I presented it. First, a summary of the Meridian Life application, the $4 million policy, the disclosure irregularities, the pending review. I redacted my name wherever it appeared. I did not redact Derek's. I included the date of application and the specific policy structure, which a general counsel would recognize as unusual. Second, the denial documentation from the prior application, the $1 million policy with the third-party beneficiary. I included the denial grounds, I included the timeline, which showed that the application predated the car accident by roughly 2 months. Third, a summary, carefully worded, factually grounded, legally reviewed by Victor before I walked in the door, of the ongoing investigation into a pattern of conduct involving insurance fraud, financial deception, and what the document characterized as intentional interference with physical safety. This was the phrase Victor had insisted on. I had argued briefly for something more direct. Victor had been unmoved, which I respected. Fourth, a 1-page financial analysis of Derek's position across his current portfolio, showing the leverage ratios on each project, with a specific note at the bottom that read, "In the event of significant reputational or legal disruption to the managing partner, the personal guarantee structures on the following projects would be at risk of triggering default review clauses." I had highlighted the North Side project. Patricia Fenn read all of it. She was a thorough reader. I waited. I have been in many rooms where I have presented information and waited for the person across from me to absorb it. And I have learned that you can tell a great deal about a person by what they do when they finish reading. Some people ask questions. Some people put the papers down and stare at the table. Some people try to be unreadable, which is its own kind of read. Patricia Fenn finished reading and looked up at me and said, "Is this currently under law enforcement review?" "It will be," I said. "Within the next 2 weeks, in my estimation. The documentation is complete. And you're bringing this to me because your client's deal will be affected whether or not he knows in advance," I said. "I'm giving him the opportunity to know in advance." She looked at me for a moment. "Ms. Hartwell, I appreciate the courtesy. I have to ask, what's your interest in this?" "I'm the name that's redacted," I said. Patricia Fenn looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked back at the documents. Then she looked back at me. "I see," she said. "I assumed you would," I said. She gathered the documents, the copies I'd brought for her, and set them in a neat stack. "I'll need to speak with my client immediately." "Of course," I said. "Is there a timeline by which we should be prepared to—" "I'd move quickly," I said. "The insurance company's review period closes in 6 business days." She nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Hartwell." I stood. I picked up my bag. I had 3 pens in it. "One more thing," I said. "If your client decides to inform the managing partner that this meeting occurred, I'd ask that he not mention my name. I'm not certain it's safe." Patricia Fenn looked at me with an expression that contained, if I am reading it correctly across time, something between professional composure and genuine human horror. "I understand," she said quietly. "Thank you," I said. I left. Bernard Kulik called his attorneys that evening. His attorneys called the lead financing bank the following morning. The lead financing bank had a risk management team that began reviewing Derek's personal guarantee structure before noon. By the following Monday, the $30 million deal was in formal hold. Derek didn't know why. Derek found out Thursday, when the bank's relationship manager called him. I know this because Derek's work assistant, who is not Ashley Merritt but a different assistant, his administrative coordinator, had a habit of logging all calls in the shared firm calendar, which Derek had never revoked my access to because he had not yet realized there were a number of digital artifacts he had left accessible to me throughout our marriage, because he had not thought carefully about what it means to be married to someone who finds things for a living. Thursday evening, Derek came home looking like a man who has seen the edge of something he doesn't fully understand yet. I had dinner on the table, which I had prepared with complete normalcy, because the thing about being a forensic accountant is that you understand that the moment before the resolution is not the moment to let anything show. "The North Side deal is in hold," he said. He sat down. He looked at his food. He looked at me. "I don't know what happened. The bank said there were concerns about the guarantee structure. That sounds stressful, I said. It came out of nowhere, he said. Yesterday, everything was fine. Things change quickly, I said. He looked at me for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes, some small alarm that didn't yet have enough information to become a conclusion. Yeah, he said. I guess they do. We ate dinner. He didn't sleep well that night. I know because I could hear him moving around downstairs at 2 a.m. I lay in bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about the fact that the following day, Victor was filing the initial petition, and that the police, who Victor's office had been quietly briefing for 2 weeks, in coordination with the insurance fraud investigation that Meridian Life had now formally triggered, were preparing their own timeline. The dominoes were falling in the order I'd arranged them. The last one was already tipping. By the end of the following week, the leverage cascade had spread to Derek's other deals. When the North Side project went into hold and word got into the professional community, which took about 72 hours, because commercial real estate is a small world with excellent informal communication, the partners on the 2 smaller deals quietly requested reviews of their own guarantee structures. One of them found a clause they'd previously overlooked. The other found nothing but got nervous anyway, which in real estate is functionally the same as finding something. Derek's firm's credit line was flagged. His personal accounts were frozen as part of the insurance fraud investigation, which Meridian Life had formally referred to the state insurance commissioner's office, which had in turn notified the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, which is the point at which things became official in a way that Derek could no longer explain away. I know this timeline precisely because Victor's office was coordinating with the investigators, and I had been formally designated as a cooperating witness, which meant I received updates, which I read in the way I read all documents, carefully, completely, and with particular attention to the dates. I had moved out of the house 2 days after the dinner where Derek didn't sleep. Victor had arranged a temporary residence through a firm that handles these situations for clients who need to be somewhere their spouse doesn't know about. I took my work laptop, my personal documents, 3 changes of clothes, and my file. I left everything else. Derek's call came on a Friday morning, 11 days after I'd left. I answered because I knew he'd eventually call, and because I wanted to hear it end. Claire. His voice was different. The smoothness was gone. What was underneath was not something I recognized immediately, and then I did. It was the voice of a man who has spent his life never being told no by anyone who matters, encountering for the first time a no that cannot be charmed or argued or waited out. Derek, I said, what did you do? It wasn't a question. It was barely even a sentence. It was the sound of someone trying to assemble the shape of something they still don't fully see. I'm not sure what you're referring to, I said, which was a lie, but a legal one. Victor had been specific. The deal is gone, he said. The bank is, Claire, they're talking about fraud, insurance fraud. The FBI, a pause. His voice, underneath the desperation, had a note of something almost like genuine disbelief. I don't understand how... Derek, I said. He stopped. You applied for a $4 million life insurance policy on my life, I said, without my knowledge. 2 months after I totaled a car with compromised brakes. You had previously applied for a different policy, smaller, with a beneficiary who wasn't me. You rerouted my security cameras and scheduled a medical appointment designed to manufacture a health record that would make a future event look like natural causes. You did these things while living in the same house as me, while eating dinner across from me. Silence. You could have just divorced me, he said. And there was something in it, something low and strange and half-swallowed, that sounded almost like he meant it. That sounded like the person he'd been before whatever calculation he'd made, before whatever moment he'd decided that the math worked out in a particular direction. There was something in his voice that sounded, briefly, like the person I had actually married. I do not say this to excuse anything. I say it because it's true, and the truth of it is part of why this ending tastes the way it does. You could have just not tried to kill me, I said. Seems like we both had options. The line was quiet for a moment. I loved you, he said. I did love you. I know, I said, and I did know. The evidence supported it. The early years, before whatever shifted, before whatever broke. The evidence supported a version of Derek Cole who had been a real person once. That's the worst part. I ended the call. Victor called me the following Monday to tell me that the FBI had issued a formal notice to Derek's attorneys regarding the insurance fraud investigation. The state's attorney's office was reviewing the broader pattern of conduct. The divorce petition, which had been filed the previous week, had been served. How are you holding up? Victor asked, in the tone of a man who asks this question professionally and has learned to mean it anyway. I'm working, I said. I have a client whose CFO has been filing inconsistent amortization schedules for 3 years. It's interesting. A pause. Are you sleeping? Enough, I said. Ms. Hartwell. He paused again. I want to be clear that what you did was, legally, strategically, it was extraordinarily well executed. I've seen clients with far more resources and far more time do far less. I had an excellent attorney, I said. You had a plan before you called me, he said dryly. I refined it. You refined it significantly, I said. Yes, he said. I did. The divorce proceedings took the 11 weeks they took, in which Derek's attorneys tried 3 different approaches, and Victor disassembled each of them with the particular patience of a person who is not billing by the hour and has therefore no incentive to hurry. The settlement, when it came, reflected the full scope of what the financial investigation had uncovered about the marital assets Derek had not disclosed, including 2 accounts I hadn't known about, and a piece of undisclosed equity in a property in Michigan that his attorneys had tried to characterize as pre-marital, until our forensic review of the transaction timeline made that characterization untenable. I know about transaction timelines. It's literally my job. On the Tuesday, I signed the final documents. The notary, the pen, Victor's table, Cheryl with the professional neutral expression. I took the elevator down to the lobby and stood on Wacker for a moment in the wind off the river. November. The lake was doing something theatrical with the clouds. I could see the elevated tracks from where I was standing, and the red line came through while I stood there, and I watched it and thought about the specific texture of the past 11 weeks. I had spent those weeks operating at a level of focus that had left very little room for anything else. Fear had come and gone. Anger had been useful and then had been set down. What remained, standing on Wacker in November, was something I don't have a clean word for. Not triumph, not relief, not sadness, not satisfaction, though it contained elements of all of these in proportions that shifted depending on the moment. There is a specific kind of fatigue that comes from winning a game you should never have had to play. I'm not talking about exhaustion. I'd been more tired. I mean a fatigue that is really a kind of awareness, that a significant quantity of energy that should have gone somewhere else had gone into this, and the going into this had been necessary, and the necessity was the thing that cost. I had survived. 3 times it turned out I had survived. By luck, by coincidence, by a forgotten medical appointment, and a slow leak that hadn't leaked quite enough, and a randomness that had no business being on my side. And then a 4th survival, not by luck at all, by everything I'd spent 13 professional years building and every instinct I'd inherited from a woman in Rockford who worked double shifts and knew where every dollar went. My phone buzzed. A text. 312 area code. Janine, your risk profile just improved significantly. I stared at it for a moment. I knew, in that moment, that I had more questions for Janine than I had yet asked. I knew that there was a reason she had called me the way she had. The specificity of the warning, the gray area she'd stepped into, the note in her voice that was not professional at all but something older and more personal. I would ask her, over dinner the following week, and she would tell me about her sister, a story that is not mine to tell here, except to say that it existed, and that it explained everything, and that Janine Kwan had seen a pattern she recognized and had chosen to name it, at professional risk, because she had learned what happens when patterns go unnamed. I would hug her when she told me. I am not a hugger. I made an exception. But standing on Wacker in the November wind, I hadn't asked yet. I just had the text. Your risk profile just improved significantly. The laugh started somewhere I wasn't expecting, which is to say, I wasn't expecting it at all. I hadn't laughed in 11 weeks in any way that meant something, hadn't had space for it, hadn't found anything in the preceding months that contained the precise combination of relief and absurdity and human warmth that laughter requires. But Janine, who speaks in actuarial tables, who reads the fine print of her own birthday cards, who stepped into a gray area because she knew what gray areas cost when you ignore them. Janine had sent me an actuarial pun at the exact moment I was standing in the wind on Wacker trying to figure out what I felt. The laugh was real. It was loud enough that a man walking past me on the sidewalk gave me a look. I didn't care. I laughed for probably 30 seconds straight, which is an eternity for a person who has spent 11 weeks operating at extreme precision. I laughed until my eyes watered, which was convenient because it meant something else could leak out too, something that had been waiting in the queue behind all the organized grief and controlled fury and cold strategic thinking. And this was fine. This was allowed. This was the thing you let happen when you're standing on a public sidewalk in November, and you're alive, and you've just signed the last piece of paper. I sent Janine back a string of laughing emojis. She sent back. Statistically, that's the appropriate response. I put my phone in my pocket. The L came through again. The wind came off the lake. Somewhere in a federal building not far from where I was standing, a financial crimes division was working through the documentation package that Victor's office had submitted. And the documentation was organized. Because I had organized it. Because I organize things. Because that is the most dangerous thing about me and always has been. Give me a reason to look at your numbers, and I will look at them until I find the thing you don't want me to find. And then I will find the next thing, and the next, until the entire structure of what you thought you'd hidden is laid out in front of me in a format that other people can read and understand and act upon. Derek had thought he was being careful. Derek had thought he'd married someone who wouldn't look. He had married, in fact, the specific person in the world most likely to look, to find, to organize, to act. He had done this by choice, which means somewhere in whatever went wrong inside him, there was a spectacular failure of self-awareness that I might have found sad if I had any energy left for sad. I had spent all my energy. I was going to need to sleep, to eat real food, to call my mother, to finish the amortization schedule case, to eventually decide what to do with a 4-bedroom colonial in Wilmette that I was planning to sell. I was going to do all of those things. But for now, here, on a Tuesday in November on Wacker Drive with the lake wind in my face and 3 pens in my bag, and the sound of my own laughter still somewhere in my chest, I was already looking forward to what I'd find in the next set of numbers.